panel with us this evening to answer your questions. Can't imagine what you're going to be asking about, can you? 0345 6060 973. John Nicholson is SNP MP for Ochil and South Perthshire. Is it Perthshire or Perthshire?
Perthshire.
Whatever. He's also the party's
really care about
DCF spokesperson. Kate Maltby is a columnist for the I newspaper. She's a writer and a critic. Ella Robertson McKay is chair of Conservative Young Women and managing director of One Young World. And in just a moment, we're going to be joined by Lord Bird, John Bird, founder of the Big Issue and Crossbench peer. You can, of course, watch us on Global Player as well, but get your calls in right now on 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. As if by magic, John has appeared. Welcome, John. Right, let's get on with the first question. It's Adrian in Bournemouth. Hello, Adrian.
Hi, how you doing? You all right?
All right, thank you. What would you like to say?
Well, firstly, I'm fuming, but let's not go down that road. Right, Donald Trump spent many, many, many years dog whistling to the right so that when he needed them, they were there for him when he wanted to cling on to power. And I want to know whether these guys think, are they as worried as I am that Boris might try and cling on to power to that degree?
John Nicholson.
I worked in American politics. I'm immensely sad to see what's happened to American politics. There are similarities, but there's big differences. And our system is not the same as the American system. That said, the scenes that we've seen outside the House of Commons tonight are absolutely disgraceful. And it shows how important it is not to feed the far-right conspiracy theorists. Because what we've seen is a transference of conspiracy theory lies fed by the Prime Minister about Jimmy Savile against the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer. And he has been pursued by thugs in the streets of central London tonight. The Prime Minister, I think, bears huge responsibility, as do the cowardly ministers who are not prepared to stand up and say these are lies. I had the disinformation minister before me in the Culture Select Committee, and I asked him directly about this, and he was not prepared to condemn what Boris Johnson had said. If you can't get the disinformation minister to condemn disinformation, who will?
What's his real title or her real title?
Well, disinformation is one of the one of his portfolios.
Right.
He covers
Who is this?
Chris Philp.
Right.
He covers disinformation as part of his portfolio.
Kate Maltby.
Well, Adrian, I'm fuming too, and I think your question gets right to the heart of it. But there are two separate things here that I think we need to distinguish between. The first thing to say is that the claim that Boris Johnson made in the Commons about Keir Starmer was completely unacceptable. It was just the latest in a number of things that make him completely and utterly unfit for office. And as I think Iain said earlier this evening, he should go back to the House of Commons and he should apologise. Separately,
not just that, he should also mean it.
He should mean it, and he should be able to talk about why it was wrong. But secondly, I do think it's important to distinguish comments made by the Prime Minister, however irresponsible they are, and the whipping up of a particular mob, a particular group of people today, because to be quite frank, no one gets that radicalised in a week. I mean, and any of us who have been around in Westminster, who've been physically present over the last few weeks, can tell you that there has been a horrifically febrile atmosphere of protest already, that certain of the characters who you can recognise on the video have been involved in far-right and far-left conspiracy theories, often where the far left and the far right meet. Piers Corbyn, I'm now told it's being reported that he was present. And I get worried when we draw very clear lines between rhetoric by any person and action by other people, because I was listening to your show earlier, Iain, as I came in, and you had a caller saying, of course, there are people who can't control themselves, and then when they hear the Prime Minister speak, of course they're going to go, well, actually, that's not true. Everyone can control themselves. They're responsible for their own actions. And I actually think there's a much bigger problem than just the Prime Minister's statements, which is no one should be that radicalised already. We shouldn't have that much of a problem in our society with right-wing conspiracies.
How do you know if he's sincere you both said he should apologise and be sincere in his apology.
You can tell when someone means an apology, can't you? I mean,
with Boris Johnson,
we've seen enough apologies
insincere
over the years. We know that Tony Blair, he was the arch apologiser, and I think he generally did mean it. I'm not sure whether we can say that. Well, in fact, I know we can't say that with Boris Johnson.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, I think Iain and I are being hopeful. I think we're being hopeful rather than expectant.
Boris Johnson has actually now responded to the events of tonight. He's tweeted this: "The behaviour directed at the leader of the opposition tonight is absolutely disgraceful. All forms of harassment of our elected representatives are completely unacceptable." Sounds a bit like Jeremy Corbyn there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All forms, blah, blah, blah. "I thank the police for responding swiftly." I then quote tweeted that. And I said, "I presume there will be a follow-up tweet apologising for your outrageous remarks in the Commons which directly provoked these appalling scenes. You should immediately go to the House and make a statement apologising. It's the right thing to do. Do the right thing."
Hear, hear.
Ella Robertson McKay, you draw the short straw this evening. I mean, you are a Conservative. Can you defend that?
I'm not sure why he said it, to be honest. I had thought maybe, well, it just cut and thrust of politics, but clearly to a lot of people it's gone well beyond the cut and thrust of what we expect in the House. It was inaccurate and he shouldn't have said it. And I think clearly to some people it has, as Adrian pointed out, acted as a dog whistle. And therefore this demands beyond a clarification. This does demand an apology. And we know from what we've seen in America with really troubling conspiracy theories like QAnon that paedophilia really is the red rag to the bull. And I think it's really, really important that this clarification is made. We cannot be letting British politics descend into what we've seen in the United States.
Should he go?
Well, that's above my pay grade. That is for the parliamentary party to decide.
Well, you're chair of Conservative Young Women. You presumably have a view.
I think, like a lot of people, and I'm not hiding behind the reports, but I really, really want to see what is in this Sue Gray report. Not only, we've seen one or two photos, but apparently there are 300. I would like to see all of them. I would like to know, were people whipping out the odd bottle of wine? Was there a party where Wilfred Johnson's swing was broken? I want to know what happened. I want to know what role our elected officials played and who was responsible for what. And at that point, I think it's fair for people to say, whether how egregious it was or it wasn't. I think it's really important that everyone in number 10, new or old, does not underestimate the scale of insults to the nation. And I think it's a really, really serious moment for everyone involved in public life to consider their behaviour. But personally, I really do want to see the full police report.
Okay. John Bird, do you see the analogy that Adrian, our questioner, is drawing here between what happened in America and what's happening in this country now, or is it exaggerated?
Yeah, I mean, I see that there's, you could make a connection with them. I mean, I actually don't really agree with this argument over whether Boris Johnson is a liar and a cheat. I don't agree with the argument over whether or not he should. You can tell whether he's genuine or not. Politicians, on the whole, have to tailor what they say, and he didn't tailor it. What I'm interested in is the logic behind why he would say that. That's what I'm interested in. And because I think you'll find logic even in the most illogical things. And what he was trying to do was say, look, I can't be blamed for everything. And this guy over here is opposing me, can't be blamed for everything, because on his watch, Savile got away with blue murder. So that is the argument. If there had been some clarity about what he meant, then we wouldn't be having this argument. The problem is, and this is where I agree with my fellow panelists, the problem is you should not be moving into an area where you could be misinterpreted or you could be seen as being spurious and dismissive about a party leader. So that's where I do agree. My argument about all of this, by the way, about the Prosecco and all that, I think we missed a brilliant chance of changing the government. And we missed it just before Christmas when the Owen Paterson thing came, that was where we could really have learnt something. We could have learnt that there are people leaving government who, because they've been in government and have had public office, can go off and enrich themselves and end up with millions and millions and millions of pounds. To me, that was something that the government should have fallen over. This, I think, we will not learn as much as if we could, and that is why I believe that you need to separate government decision making from who decides who gets the government contract. If you want to get rich in Britain, get a government contract.
Okay, John.
You're absolutely right about Owen Paterson, but my goodness, I think you're being far too kind in your interpretation of what the Prime Minister was up to. This is a guy who's operated in exactly the same way for decades. He knows exactly what he was doing. He wasn't saying that there is overall general guilt at the DPP over the Savile affair. I've got his words in front of me. He said this. This is what he actually said, because I thought this would come up. He said of Keir Starmer, quote, "He spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile." He wasn't talking about the DPP in general. He used the word he very deliberately to make a link between Jimmy Savile and the failure to prosecute and Keir Starmer. It was a foul link, and it was a lie.
And the corollary from this, of course, is that if you look on Twitter now, a lot of people who want to think ill of Keir Starmer are tweeting, yeah, he didn't prosecute any of these Muslim grooming gangs in the north of England either. Somebody's put a list of all of the ones that were prosecuted from 2008 to 2013. So nobody's dealing with facts here.
And he's my political opponent. But I do not think one should lie about your political opponents, especially in this egregious way. So, I go on the record saying it was a lie.
We're in this situation because what should have happened before Christmas, the government should have fallen over what it did, over all of the things that they were doing around government contract. The gravy train arrived in this country. The COVID gravy train arrived, and thousands of people made a hit on that, and hundreds of big businesses made money.
Tory backbenchers were never going to vote down the government on that issue, I have to tell you, John.
But we didn't even make it an issue, didn't we?
Well, I think a lot of people did make it an issue, and the government lost a by-election over it. Kate?
I wanted to go back to this point about prosecuting journalists, because I think this is actually one where my co-panellists have reminded me, I was too quick to say you can't draw a line between Boris's comments and the crowd, because when you listen to what they were saying on that footage, they did shout at Starmer, didn't they? Why were you prosecuting journalists? Why were you prosecuting journalists? And now that is a line that has, again, come straight out of the Prime Minister's playbook. And I think I should also add here, I'm the deputy chair of something called Index on Censorship. We're a charity that actively supports journalists against authoritarian governments and intrusion around the world. I have to tell you, I'm a lot more worried about the online safety bill that this Conservative government is bringing in to try and limit what people can say on the internet, to try and limit what kind of journalism can be done on the internet, than any of us have ever been on about Keir Starmer. He's never been on anyone's media freedom watch list as the enemy.
And you'll remember, of course, that Boris Johnson conspired to have a journalist beaten up with his pal.
Well, I think we should be careful about that.
I don't think we should be careful about it at all. We've all heard the recording. He conspired to have a journalist beaten up by one of his pals, and we know that we did. I
think your wording there is rather inaccurate, I may say so, John.
How should I have worded it?
He was the recipient of a phone call from Darius Guppy, and he didn't object. Now, you could, if you want to describe that as conspiring, fine, but it wasn't his finest hour. I think we can all agree on that. Ella, let's come back to you for a second. I was talking earlier in the programme about the article which he wrote, 4 or 5 years ago, describing Muslim women looking like letterboxes. Yeah. Now, I had people phoning into this programme saying that a friend of mine is a Muslim woman. She was wearing a niqab down the street and someone ripped her niqab off. Yep. And it was a direct result of this. It gave licence to people to do it. That's exactly what's happened here again, isn't it? Actions have consequences. Careless talk in the Second World War cost lives. Luckily, no lives have been cost here, but...
Words have weight. And the Prime Minister's words carry significant weight in the mind of the British people. And I think that this really comes down to tone and the tone of our politics. And I think that most people watching at home, when they see what happens in the House, feel frustrated. They feel that it doesn't represent them. It doesn't represent the civil kind of conversations that they like to have in the pub, the kind of conversations we're having here. And I think it's upon all of us to try and raise and elevate the public tone. And I think that's right across the country. And I really, really implore all of our elected officials to do their bit to raise the tone, because we've seen what happens in America when there's a race to the bottom when it comes to tone. And it's regrettable and devastating to watch. This is not the direction we should be going in. Having said that, I think that sometimes, things can get blown out of proportion. People can spend far too much time retweeting a meme of someone on the backbenches of the House of Commons rather than focusing on what, the legislative agenda that's actually at play, that's making a difference to people's lives.
Do we think that all politicians need to really examine what they're saying? Not to say that people can't give instant responses, but when you plan a response, and I am going to criticise Keir Starmer here, when he called the Delta variant the Johnson variant, I did think to myself, come on. Have we really debased ourselves that much?
Yeah.
I mean, this is happening all over the place, isn't it? It's not just in one party.
Not to spar unnecessarily, but you had Wes Streeting today calling the NHS backlog the Tory backlog. And as John will know, in Scotland, 1 in 10 Scots is on an NHS backlog. So, I mean, all of this name calling and clap back, slam down culture, I just think it's just horrid. And I think it's not helpful. And I think the public don't actually appreciate it in the way that some pundits think that they do.
Right. Well, I'm sure we've got more questions on this. Adrian, just a quick response from you to the answers that you've heard.
I go along with. It frustrates me a little bit that maybe I'm the only person that can see what I can see, which means I'm wrong. I don't know, but you think Donald Trump used to brand everybody? He had Crooked Hillary, he had Sleepy Joe. Boris has managed to brand himself pretty well over the last few months as Boris the Liar, and I genuinely believe this was his game plan, to pick something that was even worse than that and brand him with it, and he knows it's never going to wash off now.
Adrian, thank you very much indeed. We'll come to more of your calls in a second. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
21 minutes past 8, let me reintroduce my panel to you. Lord John Bird is here, founder of the Big Issue, Crossbench peer. John Nicolson, who's the SNP's DCMS spokesperson. Kate Maltby is a columnist for the newspaper. And Ella Robertson McKay is chair of Conservative Young Women. Right, next question. This is from Priyanka in Oxford. Hello, Priyanka.
Good evening. After this whole soap opera over the last month over letters of the 1922 committee and so on, is the Conservative Party really capable of disciplining, let alone changing its Prime Minister?
The Conservative Party is quite good at changing its leaders, but it hasn't done it yet. So the question is the Conservative Party incapable of disciplining the Prime Minister? Ella Robertson McKay.
I think that they're absolutely capable of it, if that's what it comes to. I think I can absolutely see why the backbenchers want to see the police report before they do or they don't decide to put in a letter. But I have absolute faith in Graham Brady and the Conservative Party constitution that if the number of letters are received, that due process will be followed. I really, really can see why in the milieu of media reporting about rules and regulations in Parliament, people might have concern. But I think when it comes to these sorts of matters, there are some backbenchers who absolutely love to enforce electoral rules, and they'll be rubbing their hands with glee at the opportunity to do so.
What will happen, though, if the 54 limit is reached and there is a vote of confidence and Boris Johnson wins it by a very narrow margin? I mean, that's almost the worst of all worlds, isn't it? That
would be that we've seen that situation play out in fairly recent history. But I think we've got May council elections coming up, and I think that will be a really great opportunity to read not just what the media and what the MPs are saying, but what the public think. I think the media predicted that we'd get shellacked last time, and it was a fantastic result for the Conservatives across the country in May last year. And it'll be a really great opportunity for the people to have their say.
John Bird.
Well, I think the Conservative Party is very, very different from the one I've known through many, many decades. And you can look at the fact that you've got Boris Johnson, who is non-ideological, opportunistic, always willing to change his mind and do many, many things. And if you look at the fact that his backbone largely is a very big part of it is working class, I think maybe the Conservative Party is going to be listening to its members and listening to the electorate in a way that it's probably never done before, because it is not the traditional Conservative Party. And I've had many discussions now with Conservative MPs, and you can close your eyes, and in some ways they do appear as though they're more Labour than they are Conservative. And I think all of those changes are the result of what Boris managed to achieve in 2019. But I do believe that the party is now listening because it has to.
It's interesting what you say about the Tory party membership, because generally they stay loyal to whoever the leader is. If you think back to, you and I can remember 1975 when the Tory party membership, they didn't have a vote in that leadership election, but they were very loyal to Ted Heath. And even when Ian Duncan Smith was overthrown, I think a lot of the membership was still very loyal to him. Kate Maltby.
Well, I agree with that last point, particularly about Ian Duncan Smith, but we've been talking so far about whether or not the Conservative Party is capable of changing its leader. Obviously, eventually it is. What I find really interesting about Priyanka's question is this word disciplining. She's actually asked, is the Conservative Party incapable of disciplining the Prime Minister? I think they probably are incapable of disciplining the Prime Minister because they're not really interested in disciplining the Prime Minister. No political party is interested in disciplining its own leader, at least not for grandiose ethical reasons. They're interested in winning, effective leadership, and they're going to stick behind him if he can deliver wins. But what I think is behind this question is really interesting is over the years I've been involved in quite a few conversations, both sort of privately and publicly, about standards in the House of Commons, public behaviour standards for MPs, particularly around the Me Too movement, but also around corruption, lobbying, things like that. And in all of those conversations, what we eventually get back to is a kind of fundamental problem, which is when you try to impose sort of HR standards or civil service codes of conduct on elected politicians, you come up against this question of whether any unelected civil servant or any unelected body should be someone imposing some kind of sanction, which is sort sort of what we've been looking at around the Sue Gray report, or whether the public has to be the final discipliner. Because, of course, we live in a democracy, and having some civil servant come along and say, your favourite person who you've all voted for, well, he's been a bad boy, so I'm going to just take him out of power. That creates a whole lot of problems, even if the civil servant is actually correct, and even if ethically we agree with her. So, at the end of the day, I think we, the electorate, have to be the people who deliver discipline, if we're talking about moral discipline. And in the case of Boris Johnson, I hope that we, as the electorate, eventually do.
John Nicholson, there will be people in the Tory party, probably many Tory MPs, who take the view, well, Boris will be Boris. You've got to let Boris be Boris, because if you don't let Boris be Boris, he's not that election-winning machine that he's proved to be in the past. And, you can say that about many... people used to say that about Alex Salmond as well. He had his defects, but he won elections, and people forgave him for some of his defects. What do you
I don't think we quite knew what all the defects were.
This is true. This is very true.
So you will say nowadays?
At that point, no. At the time, I was a journalist, and I used to follow him, and I certainly had no idea about the defects. But we're talking about Boris Johnson. I had MPs coming up to me and saying to me, I'm going to vote for Boris Johnson. He's absolutely ghastly. I dislike him. I know it's all going to end very badly, because we all knew it would end up either with a sex scandal or a financial scandal, or perhaps a combination of the two. Nobody thought he was going to be cheered out of Downing Street, I think. But Tory MPs had a very clear idea of what they were voting for, and they thought their party was facing an existential crisis, and he was the person who would save them. And all the problems down the line, they would worry about them down the line.
And to an extent, they were right.
Yeah.
Because it was all, at that point, we have to remember what the circumstances were at the time. It was all about
Nigel Farage. We remember.
Done, wasn't it?
But the question posed, I think, is a good one. Do Tory MPs have the guts to discipline him? And of course, one day they will do. They're absolutely vicious, the Conservative Party. They're slavering sycophants walking past behind them saying, oh, Your Majesty, anything else we can do for you at this time? And then suddenly the knives will be out and he'll be defenestrated. Suddenly, out the window, he will go. We've seen it with Tory leader after Tory leader after Tory leader. You mentioned Ted Heath. They were all adoring Ted Heath at one point, and then they viciously stabbed him in the back and the front, did the same to Thatcher. They'll do it to Boris Johnson. His day of reckoning is coming.
But it goes back to what I was saying. If they don't see their leader as an election winner, they will get rid.
Exactly.
That's if you don't learn
it's
from
only
history,
because he's
you
a
repeat
winner.
it.
He's a winner, so he stops being a winner and he's out the door.
And all the new 2019 Tories, they're suddenly waking up and they're seeing what he really stands for. And I don't agree with...
He won them their seats, didn't he? That's the problem they've got, because they look at all the possible successors.
It was the Emperor's...
And they think, well, are they going to win me my seat back in the way that Boris did?
Do you seriously think they look at Boris Johnson and think that he'll allow them to keep these red wall Tory seats at the next election? They all know they're one-term Conservatives.
Some of them do. I mean, Christian Wakeford, the one that defected to Labour, he was certainly of that view that... he came and did interviews in the studio, and I was astonished at some of the things he was saying. And it was clearly because he didn't give a damn anymore, because he knew that he would lose his seat.
And he knew he'd get a nice Labour selection in the same seat and would roll on.
We'll see, won't we? We'll come to more of your calls in a second. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC, or watching it on Global Player, maybe. It's 8:30. Let's get the latest news headlines from Lucinda Horsley.
2 people have been arrested after the Labour leader was driven away from Parliament by police after being surrounded by protesters. Their repeated comments the Prime Minister made towards Sir Keir Starmer about Jimmy Savile last week. Boris Johnson has called the behaviour absolutely disgraceful. Britain sending another 350 troops to Poland in a show of support to Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is meeting the French President Emmanuel Macron for talks on the troops Russia has gathered on the border. Footballer Mason Greenwood is no longer sponsored by Nike. They've dropped the Manchester United player after he was arrested on suspicion of rape and assault. LBC weather, breezy and mild in the south tonight with some rain, blustery showers further north, a low of 2 degrees.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:34 on LBC. John Bird, John Nicholson, Kate Maltby and Ella Robertson McKay still with me to answer your questions. I always get a frisson of excitement when we get a call from the Republic of Ireland. I've no idea, there's no logic to it, but I'm getting that frisson now from Kieran in Limerick. Hello, Kieran.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Hi, very well.
Great. I'm just wondering, is the time for old Etonians presenting policies like levelling up in British Parliament coming to an end?
John Bird, it's slightly incongruous, isn't it, to have an old Etonian talking about levelling up, I suppose?
Not really. I mean, what did Benjamin Disraeli talk about? One Britain, one country. I mean, the Tories have a remarkable list on occasions of rallying to the needs. I'm not saying they always fulfil the needs, but I'm not a classist. I've been a classist. I spent too long being a classist. I really don't care who delivers the levelling up. I don't care who creates the equality. I don't think where it comes from. The fact that it's that a whole slew of old Etonians have come this way. I mean, I blame them for things other than the fact that they're old Etonians. I blame them mainly because of the fact that they didn't address the fact that we're a low-wage economy, we're a low-investment economy, we are not an economy that knows how to build new opportunities for people in poverty. They don't know how to morph people out of poverty. They'll give people a handout but not a hand up. So these are the kind of considerations. The fact that they're old Etonians or they come from, Gas Street Comprehensive is not my problem. I got rid of that problem a long time ago.
Do you not think, though, that it's quite difficult for somebody who's got Boris Johnson's background to understand what it's like in some places in the country that need levelling up?
Well, I think that goes for virtually everybody, and it really doesn't matter, because the thing is, whatever part of society you come from, when you join Parliament, there's a kind of patina, there's a kind of, go to Oxbridge, most of the people, irrespective of what part of society they come from, they go to Oxbridge and they suddenly become different kinds of people, and they become people who have absolutely no idea how the poor live or what we need to do. So I'm not a great lover of this idea that it's just the public schools who have lost the plot. I believe that there are many, many working class Labourites who've gone through Oxbridge and all that and gone through university, and they get into Parliament and they don't know where reality is. They leave it behind. And I think that's one of the problems with Parliament. My big problem is, why are we not drawing on a larger gene pool than the old Etonians, or the people who came up through the trade union movement, or the lecturers at university, or the people who, run companies like estate agents? Where are the people who have done real jobs like miners? Where are the people who have done jobs like nurses? I mean, the only people you find in politics are the top nurses. You don't find people who are nurses or police officers.
John's best friend Nadine Dorris, she was a nurse, wasn't she?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't spoken to Nadine today.
One swallow
I must
doesn't make
check
a summer.
my text messages. I think she's gone off to Saudi Arabia to fun times in the sun. John, I'm first generation to go to university. Nobody in my family had ever gone. I think if you look at our SNP group, in fact, they are Kezia Dugdale said they look like Scotland, the former Labour Party leader. We have a wide representation from the early 20s through to 70s, big age difference as well. I like your reference to Benjamin Disraeli, and of course I loved reading Benjamin Disraeli at university. But he was an outsider. He didn't go to one of the posh schools. He was Jewish, and I think after a quick Google, I've discovered that he went to university in Walthamstow. Exactly. So he really fought his way up. You're absolutely right about the Conservative Party. They draw from a very narrow social gene pool. Far too many old Etonians. Nothing wrong with going to Eton.
I don't think that's
fair. But
used to be fair isn't anymore.
Well, I think you could make a case that after this last election, it has changed. But look at their leadership over many years. There's a few from outside it, but pretty consistently. And I know you're going to tell me about John Major. You can mention Ted T.
John Major,
Can I come in on
Ian
this,
Duncan Smith. Go on, Ella.
So I chair the Conservative Young Women Group. So we're trying to get more young women into public life. So by definition, I'm interested in people who didn't go to Eton. I think we are the only party to have had a female leader, let alone two female prime ministers. If you look at our front bench and the great officers of state, I mean, it looks much more like Britain than it has done in the past. And I think from 2019, we are a different party. We are drawing from different areas of the country, different backgrounds. And I think it's so important that we continue to do that. But I think ultimately the public don't really care where people chose to send their children to school when they were 11. What they care about is their intellectual understanding of the policy issues of the day, but it's their basic human empathy. It's the ability to look at someone and go, gosh, there but for the grace of God go I. This is something that we could all experience.
Is that what's going wrong?
I'm not saying that is what's going wrong, but I think people's ability to empathise is much more important than their educational CV.
Johnson doesn't have any ability to empathise. We've seen that over the last few weeks.
But can I take it back to the actual question, if that's okay? Kieran asked, has the time come for Etonians to stop talking about levelling up? Well, if we're talking about levelling up specifically, the Cabinet Minister who has been behind that project and who has been working on that project for a very long time now is Michael Gove, who is not an Etonian, who is, whatever you think of Michael Gove, he's not someone who came from he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He had, in many ways, a lot of financial challenges in the family in which he was growing up, and he was propelled by academic success and by scholarships all the way to Oxford and beyond, which takes me back slightly, to Lord Bird's comment about universities and elites and this idea that, the real problem isn't where you went to school, but whether you joined an elite at the age, in your 20s and then became detached from the world. I'm afraid that I think it's great that we have highly selective universities and that people who work extremely hard and who go through those selection processes do often end up leading the country, working at the top level. And I'm afraid when it comes to, people with real experience of trades, again, which I think is really important, or professions, I do want the top nurses in there. I do want people who have been, exceptional wherever they have come from. But I don't see why, our leaders in Parliament should be ordinary in any way. And if I can get really controversial for a moment to throw some real red meat in, I think what makes things even worse is that we live in a time when MPs are pilloried for every penny they earn, whereas in fact, compared to other high achievers and leaders in this country, they often earn considerably less. So if you want to attract highly successful talent, and maybe talent that went to Oxbridge and then did really well, the opposite, I think, of what some of my panellists want.
Good luck in selling
you
that to
are
me,
going to have to raise the amount you pay. And to sum up, this is one of my favourite statistics, though. There are only 2 millennials who have been cabinet ministers yet. Ian, you'll know who they are.
2 millennials who've been cabinet ministers.
Well, I'll tell you, and then I'll ask you again. Robert Jenrick, Rishi Sunak. What do they both have in common?
They're Conservatives.
Rich wives. Because there is something about structural wealth in this country, and frankly, the need to have it to go far in politics, which is wrong, which is a massive problem, but it is part of the fact that you don't earn an income that some of these people have been led to expect.
Ian, that is clearly the mistake.
And that's why they need to marry it. They need to marry it.
That is clearly the mistake that you and are making. So I'm going to go straight out of the studio and start looking for a wealthy wife, because that's very good advice. But
you're not a millennial, I'm afraid to say.
She's also not the wife-looking sort.
Yes, exactly. But I'm interested. I'm an old friend of Michael Gove's, which sometimes surprises people. It's great that you say that Michael Gove is in charge of levelling up, and he shows that he comes from a not a privileged background. Why do you think he felt the need to change his voice so dramatically so that he sounds as if he came from Eton? What does that say about the party? Oh, I think so, don't you?
No, not at all.
He sounds
that's
posh.
Quite an assumption of yours to me. I mean,
the way that Michael Gove...
Margaret Thatcher did the same.
Oh, she did?
Oh, she ended up sounding as though she came from the Shires.
3 decades before, but Michael Gove doesn't sound...
he still sounds Scottish.
Well, he's a council house boy.
Does he sound posh Scottish?
I think it might depend
is a posh
what time
Scottish,
of the
isn't
evening.
He switches on and off. His voice changes. It goes from quite northeast to, I would say, very Eton-y.
To be honest, I don't really care what kind of accent someone has. I really care about what they're
But if you
saying and
feel
what
you
they're
have to
doing.
change your voice to get on, what does that say about society?
I'm not sure
What
it's really
does
the
that say
office of a
about
friend to make
society?
assumptions about, and you say you're a friend of Michael Gove's, to make assumptions about at what point someone may have changed their voice and very specifically why. That's quite a sort of psychological. But in my experience, and I've known quite a few people who did, and I sound much posher than most of my family, to be frank. I know I speak like this. I know that my grandparents and my parents didn't.
How did you used to sound?
That's not what I'm saying.
Gov.
I didn't say I've changed my voice. I said I sound posher a generation down, which is quite different. But I have known a lot of people go through institutions like Oxbridge and find their voices changing, just as people change their voices when they go to America or they go and live in another country. This is something that is acted upon people rather than necessarily being a conscious choice.
And as someone
what
who
makes
is
you think that somebody going to Oxbridge is a very carefully created somebody, then goes into government and then does a good job? Because I don't believe that we live in the kind of elite world that you're talking about. I think we live in a world where incredibly educated people are making mistake after mistake after mistake. I mean, we live in a world which is going down the tubes because of climate change and all those sorts of things. We don't have we don't have an elite. We don't live in a world where there is a guarantee that somebody goes to a top university and then is going to deliver the goods.
As a Scot living in England, I can empathise with people whose accent changes. If we have a glass of wine afterwards, you might find it changes again. But I think that, to Kate's point, though, I really do want to come back on about, I really want the elites of the professions in Parliament. Like, of course we do to some extent, but I really would say, if you do anyone's job for a day, whether it's a bartender or a supermarket worker or a lorry driver, it is so much harder than you think it is. And it's not just the CEOs of professions or the head of nursing trusts who are the excellent people whose experience we need represented in Parliament. And I think it's so important that people don't feel that they need to be an elite in any profession in order to access public office. We need people from all ages and stages because they bring such valuable experience. And I really think that it's upon all of us to try and work to make sure that all of our seats of government look as much like the country they represent as possible.
My friend Zach has just texted to say, Iain, you're just a posh Essex boy. And he's I don't think I'm posh, but
is that true?
Yeah, I'm from Essex, but I hide it well.
But were you born posh? Did you become posh, or did you have poshness thrust upon you?
I'm not posh. I went to a comprehensive school. I went to the University of... My producer says, Ray, you are posh. Well, my mother would love it for everyone to think that I was posh.
Really?
She wanted me to change my name to have a double-barreled name because she thought it would help me get on in life.
What was that name going to be?
Iain Campbell Dale.
Oh.
Because I'm a quarter Scottish, John. I'm not sure if you were
I did know that.
I mean, voices are important. When I first joined LBC, somebody said, you need to change your voice. And I thought, well, I've got the job on my current voice. I don't think I'm going to change it. But sometimes you have to sort of pace it up a bit because I have a bit of a soporific voice.
Well, at least they didn't say you've got a face for radio.
Oh, no, they said that as well. 8:46.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. John Bird, John Nicholson, Kate Maltby and Ella Robertson McKay with me. Gordon wants to remind you, John Nicholson, that he asked a question in the audience on your programme Open to Question.
My goodness.
He says it was back in the 1980s when you would have been a slip of a lad, I suspect.
It was straight out of university, and I got asked if I would do this series where famous people would be grilled by school kids. And my goodness, they were tough. In the audience were a couple of folk you might have heard of as school kids. Christian Gurumurthy,
really?
Sarah Smith,
yeah,
and Hardeep Singh Kohli were all in the audience asking tough
Precocious
questions.
as ever.
They certainly were, and they asked them. Mary Whitehouse got a terrible, terrible hard time from these kids.
Oh, bless her. Right, let's go to your next question. It is from Harry in Waltham Forest. Harry, what would you like to ask?
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel.
Hello.
Does the panel think that an MP crossing the House should lead to an automatic by-election?
I feel as if we did this 3 weeks ago, but there we are. Ella?
Absolutely. I think if you're going to change political party, a lot of people will have voted for you because of the logo next to your name on the ballot. And I think people who, if you go to Citizen Independent, that's one matter. But if you change political party, it should absolutely trigger a by-election, and your constituents have got every right to get rid of you.
Kate?
So morally, yes, I'm always rather appalled when MPs cross the floor and they don't call a by-election. But technically, there is one really good counter-argument that I think gets forgot here, which is that if you tie a change in the whip, if you introduce the kind of legislation that would make it make this automatic, it'd be very, very hard to create a situation where MPs don't automatically face a by-election when their party removes the whip from them. And that creates a huge amount of blackmail and actually increases the power of central parties over potentially quite healthily rebellious MPs.
I don't think it has to be tied to the whip because, without getting boringly technical, you do need to be a member of a political party in order to represent it in the House. And I think if you change your party membership, that could trigger the by-election. It doesn't need to be linked to the whip.
Yeah, but you can be thrown out of your party as well.
Well, I think if you're thrown out of your party for breaking your code of conduct for something like harassment or something like that, that's also a very serious issue.
Well, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? The party receiving the MP always says, absolutely not, no need whatsoever, delightful to have this person with us. And the party losing says, of course, we must have a by-election, regardless of what decade we're living in. This has been an argument that's gone on forever. I mean, I suppose, Mr. Speaker, would say that actually you're elected as an individual. You might have a party colour attached to you. And of course, we all know that you would not have been elected without that party colour. But the tradition has always been that the MP remains until the next election, when almost invariably they will lose their seats. We've got two who've dropped out at the moment and joined the ALAPA party, Alex Salmond's party. And
well.
Pardon?
That worked well for them.
Yes, 1.666% at the last election. I don't know, is there significance to that figure?
I think let's not go there. John Bird.
Well, I mean, I agree with Ian. Sorry,
John.
Sorry.
He wishes he was Ian, because Ian is Scottish.
Ian in Gaelic. It's Ian in Gaelic.
Anyway, sorry. I was just going to say that you vote for an MP. You vote for the person, you don't vote for the party, though most people who do vote for an MP believe they're voting for the party. So there is that contradiction. And I think the thing is that as long as a person is in Parliament, then in a way you have to accept the fact that they are there because they were voted for at one particular time, that when the vote was taken, and they should be there till the end of the Parliament. So I wouldn't, call for a a by-election immediately.
Right. Let's. Harry, would you like to answer your own question?
Yes, if they cross the floor of the House, then they should immediately automatically go to a by-election, just to give the electorate a chance to reaffirm their original vote.
OK, thank you very much. Tweet question from McKevin. Do the panel think that attacks on Carrie Johnson are desperately weak and a form of bullying? Kate?
So again, I think this is a question we need to separate out into two halves. one thing that's clear about Carrie Simons, as was, she's a hardened political operator. She's worked in politics all her life, which incidentally makes her a perfectly appropriate person to advise the PM. She's been advising PMs professionally for some time now. And that also should mean that she should be the subject of legitimate scrutiny. And I think in particular, and what has affected my thinking on this a lot, is if there are questions about her use of the Downing Street flat at a time when all the rest of us were cooped up in lockdown, it's perfectly reasonable she should face scrutiny on that. However, yes, there is a line of attack, and I've written about this before, which is it's the oldest stereotypes in the book. You know, Marie Antoinette, Anne Boleyn, Lady Macbeth. If someone is using a really old stereotype of a nasty woman to attack a modern woman, then that should tell you straight away that there is some lazy and traditionally prejudiced thinking going on that actually detracts from, as I say, the slightly more real questions that are fair enough to, to throw at any serious political figure in Downing Street.
I was reading Sarah Vine's column in the Mail on Sunday on this, where she was married to Michael Gove, and she clearly thinks that the scrutiny that she came under contributed to the failure of their marriage. And you think, well, OK, she's a public figure, she's a columnist in the Mail, sort of inevitably you are going to get some things thrown at you. But Ella, do you think all is fair in love and politics?
I think that the way Kate framed it as legitimate criticism or legitimate scrutiny, there is legitimate scrutiny to people who surround key elements of power. And I think there are certain questions that are fair to ask, but I think the tone of the questions and the acerbic and really demeaning writing that's been I've seen online from Lord Ashcroft's book, for example, is just completely unnecessary. It's tabloid gossip whipped up to sell books, and I certainly wouldn't be buying that book. I think it's a really difficult thing for anyone in public life, because you realise that you're going to have to put your, beloved spouse or partner and potentially even your children up for scrutiny that they don't sign up for at all. And look, Carrie Johnson has had 2 children since the start of the pandemic, and anyone who's got 2 children under 2 will know that doesn't leave you a lot of time for interfering in the machinations of running the country.
Well, if she is giving him advice, it's not very good advice at the moment, isn't it? John Bird.
Well, I'm a bit lost here because, I'm sorry, but I've not got into the detail of what's happening in Number 10, because I am still outraged about what's happened over the gravy train. It's yesterday's news, so I haven't really got into the detail. But I do believe that if somebody like Carrie Johnson marries a man, that don't pass all of the grief of the man over to the wife. That's what I think the problem is. And often problems do get exported. And I would like to think that anybody who was looking at Carrie Johnson would be looking at the evidence of what she has or she hasn't done. But I think so many people have written off Number 10 at the moment that there's not much chance of having a legitimate discussion about this.
John?
If Carrie Johnson is a private person, why was she at a work party?
And on that bombshell?
Well, I've taken my wife to private parties, to public parties.
Not during COVID restrictions.
It's also the garden of her private residence. It's not.
If you or I had been in the garden of our private residence during lockdown with that number of people, we would have been prosecuted by the police. She can't have it both ways. She can't both be a completely private person, but also escape responsibility for attending a work event.
Right, let's move on to our final text question from Beth in Clapham. Guito Harry and Boris Johnson apparently sang I Will Survive together. What would you be singing with the Prime Minister? Kate.
Do you know, I had a really bad cold this week, so I think I've diplomatically lost my voice.
Oh, that's a cop-out. Disappointing. John.
Well, it wouldn't be Hasty Back, would it? I imagine it would be, I'd borrow a football anthem. Cheerio, cheerio, cheerio.
OK. Ella?
I've got to say, Get This Party Started did come to mind. But I think, maybe High Hopes. I think that's probably captures the vibe in the party at the moment.
John?
Well, I would like to bring in Ian Dury with something like They Ain't Half Been Some Clever Bastards, just to describe the nature of most governments.
You said that 20 seconds before the watershed. we'll get into terrible trouble for that. Apologies if anyone was offended. I think I would choose a song by the South African group Mango Groove, which goes, "This is not a party." Blah, blah, blah. What a wonderful way to end the programme. John Bird, John Nicholson, Kate Maltby, Ella Robertson, McKay, thank you very much for joining us. If you missed any of the show, and also you can catch up on previous Cross Questions on the Cross Question podcast feed or on the LBC YouTube channel or on Global Player. We'll have another one tomorrow at 8 o'clock. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, 2 people have been arrested after the Labour leader became surrounded by protesters near Parliament.
Hey, were you protecting Jimmy Savile, yeah?
Sir Keir Starmer had to be driven away in a police car earlier this evening. The Shadow Foreign Secretary was also heckled. LBC's Westminster correspondent Ben Kentish has more.
Keir Starmer and David Lammy unhurt, but it was pretty angry. It was pretty unpleasant when you watch those videos.